All right. Welcome, Michelle. I am so excited to have you here. It's such an honor and so fun, especially for how we met and just the connections that we have between the people that we've met along the way as well. So super excited to have you here. And Michelle Wong is an inner leader, courage, growth catalyst who mentors women to become their fullest expression of themselves. She uniquely blends human design, subconscious reprogramming, and embodiment practices to guide women in leading their lives and business that is soul-led. She's the host of the Sacred Emergence podcast and the author of Set Your Own Sail, Fire Your Alarm Clock, and Awaken to What's Possible. So Michelle, thanks for being here today. I'm so excited. My fellow nomad. Yeah, of course. So, there's, I'll just sing your praises all day long, but I'd love to hear your personal, I love to have people introduce themselves as well and just kind of maybe some of your story and how you got to where you are now and what lights you up about it. And just out of your own words, a longer version of a bio, I guess. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. So, okay, a little bit about myself. Well, I like to tell people that like where I am right now is very different than where I got started. I followed the more traditional path originally, went to school, university, immediately got a corporate job. And I was in corporate for around 10 years. But even during that time, it wasn't really linear, but it was really that whole profession of like following the ladder, so to speak. And we're going to talk about human design, but it was one of those things where I was like, this cannot be my life. And it took a little while to get to where I finally am at. But I would say like a little bit about my story is like what's unique about my story is that I left corporate 3 times. and every time I left corporate, I would be hit with this fear, this financial fear, even though it was like, it literally was just fear. I was in no dire situation really where I was going to be put out on the streets. But the fear was strong enough to pull me back into corporate. And so that happened about 3 times. And then the last time I left corporate was 4 years ago. And so now it's like really leaning into life. Like life is going to bring things up, especially as an entrepreneur. And that's the magic and the beauty of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what a difference of mindset and nervous system regulation that it takes in order to be an entrepreneur versus corporate, right? There's a lot of, what is it saying? The golden handcuffs, or there's a sense of comfort and safety that we get from having a day job or a corporate job that when you're an entrepreneur, especially when you're first starting out, can feel a lot more scary or like, oh, I need to have that, that sense of safety and learning how to create that within. So I'm super excited to dive into some of the things here. And since you mentioned human design, for those of the women in this group and who are watching who maybe don't know what human design is, can you kind of give like a lowdown of what human design is, how you came about it, and and we'll jump in with that.
Yeah, I love talking about human design. Okay, so human design in just kind of like a high level, it's a system that uses your birth chart data and it really gives you like a map of your soul. And that's really esoteric, but what I love about it is that it's very practical. It's a map of your energy. So it can share with you where you can receive other people's conditioning and what your strengths are and then what you have consistent access to. And so it's really like a beautiful system that can share with you like your strengths and what really makes you unique if you have the courage to lean into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found that I'm newly introduced to human design within I'd say the last year, but I find that it's a little bit easier for me visually and conceptually than astrology. I feel like it's a lot simpler than like traditional astrology. Was that kind of your experience or?
Yeah, well, with astrology, I first was introduced to astrology and I started to study astrology. And then when I saw human design, I was actually overwhelmed at first because I was like, whoa, this is like another system that actually encompasses astrology.
Yeah.
But when I started to really like dive deeper, I was able to, for me, just understand it a little bit more. Like I can look at a body graph, and which is a human design chart, and just like, okay, like I can decipher it.
Yeah, totally. And when someone is looking at, maybe they have some experience with their chart, what are some of the main things that for entrepreneurs or for someone that wants to fully express themselves, what are like some centers or some of the things about human design that you notice that you're like, oh, this is open, so this means this about you? Is there like a few off the top of your head? Like for me, I know I'm a 4-1 projector, splenic projector, and that, you know, like there's certain things that means, but I know when people have certain open centers or different things, it can influence or have an effect of like how you manifest that or show up as that in real time.
Yeah, well, with human design, they always talk about living into the experiment and testing it out for yourself. And before even looking at potential energy centers, I would always recommend looking at what's your strategy and your authority, and really understanding your energy type. So when I look at a chart, first thing I want to know is, what is your energy type? Because that
And what
tells
do
me
you
a
mean
lot.
by that? What is the energy type?
So there's 4 main energy types with human design that really, it's like your energy, your aura. And your aura is, it's not, it's subconscious. Not everyone can see aura, right? I can't. And so, but your aura speaks a lot. Your energy of when you walk into a room, it speaks a lot about you. So understanding your aura is so important, because it can tell you so much about how you relate to people and how people relate to you. And then how you use your strategy and authority in human design is like, really, how do you make decisions and how do you navigate the world with your energy? Understanding that is going to be so valuable in terms of going through life. And even just playing with that can be a huge game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something actually while I was in Mexico, because Michelle and I met in Mexico. I was talking with a woman who does human design, and she was telling me that my inner authority was, I think, splenic was the dominant. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was explaining that she's like, like when when you're given information, you physically in your body, it's like an immediate knowing. And she's like, and what might happen for you is that when you get too much of other people's information, you start doubting your own inner knowing. And also, when I have that knowing, sometimes it can be like in that moment, it's a yes, like this thing. And then over time, it might be harder for me to try and connect back into it. So like listening to it in real time. So again, like whether it's in relationships or my business or different things, like that was like having that validation, because I think a lot of us, whether you're splenic or not, with that intuition, have an inner knowing, and then we can start to like, depending on what open centers you have in your charts, you might be more easily influenced by other people versus trusting that inner peace. So
Yeah, like you were asking about different centers and what might be telling with someone. And I would always say the ego or the heart center, it's like the small triangle that kind of hangs off on the right. I'm always curious if that is defined in somebody, if it's colored in or not. Because usually a lot of that ties to proving oneself, self-worth. And that's the most easily conditioned energy center. Like we can take on a lot from the external if it's undefined. And so many of us can spend our whole lives trying to prove ourselves when we don't have anything we need to prove. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you just said that, especially, I think it's for men and women, obviously, but for people to understand that worthiness it's all internal and it's not based on anything external. So yeah, that like dropping the need to prove anything and just being in truth and your own personal experience is where it's at. So good. It's so good. And so there's this piece too. Have you found that I want to hear more about deconditioning, what you mean by that, and if human design plays into that for you as well. And for people who haven't heard the term deconditioning, How do you use it in your practice? What does it mean to you? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, I see deconditioning as basically, it's like we've been programmed. It's like our mindset, and with lack of a better term. So it's like there's our internal knowing versus the external. And a lot of times the external influences can be so strong that we start to adopt ourselves to the external. And in that process, we become conditioned. If we watch, I don't know, a lot of commercials and like, then we start, being programmed in that way, or just like the external content of what's happening in the world and all of that versus our own internal wisdom. And so a lot of my work is like, if we really want to embody our soul's path, and our truth, our essence, part of it is becoming aware of, well, what's not mine. And that's the deconditioning process. And I'm all about embodying human design. Like there's one thing about information and it's fun to learn, but to make it human design really effective and like meaningful, it's the embodiment piece, is putting what we're learning into practice and integrating it into our lives so that over time, we don't really need human design anymore, right? Because it's like our own soul's path. But yeah, so for me, deconditioning is releasing what isn't ours. And that takes courage. It takes guts. It takes being willing to lean into the fear.
Absolutely. And there's so much of that that's needed in the world, right? Around like religious conditioning, societal conditioning, racial conditioning, all, like financial conditioning, all of these things that, especially before the age of 10, are so programmed and indoctrinated into our subconscious, into who we think we are. And this unpacking, like the deconditioning is like the unpacking of all these learned experiences. And I love what you said too about the embodying it. And it's really easy for people to read things and rationalize them. And I find, the work that I do as well, where people are really good at intellectualizing their emotions and not actually feeling them. And this deconditioning process is also like, where did you learn to shut down your emotions? Like where did you learn that it wasn't safe, or those kinds of things? So yeah, it's such important work, and moving it from the head into the body is definitely like, I think for both of us, like the most important piece of our work too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And for people, I find that not a lot, but there is some feedback sometimes that I get, that people are like, what is embodiment? Like, what does that mean? I think actually you just spoke to that really beautifully around living it and integrating it and having it be your way of being versus that intellectualization.
Yeah,
Getting it out of my
totally.
mouth.
Yeah, well, the embodiment is the unsexy work. It's like the work, it's the hard work. It's where we have to be willing to be more aware and to like consciously like, oh, okay, like I was totally in my head, or I totally make that decision out of fear, versus like really giving myself permission to like take all of that energy that's up here and trusting the body. And that takes a little bit of practice if we're not used to it. And like sometimes embodiment, not sometimes, but it is getting into your body, going for a walk, moving your body, dancing, doing yoga, like moving the energy. Because when we can do that, then we're not so much living up here in our head. Mm-hmm. And so there's the literal of, okay, physical movement, and also the awareness of, okay, like if I want to do something differently, then I'm going to have to be willing to kind of be uncomfortable about it.
Yeah. And where have you seen with your clients, with yourself, maybe in general, where it takes the most courage? I find for people, it's speaking up and using their voice, and or doing things differently. What would you say has been your experience around that?
For exactly what you said, so even doing a Facebook Live, hitting play, and suddenly there's like people watching. And if it's something that you're just not used to doing, then give yourself that permission to push against that edge a little bit. Or it literally is. It's like seeing, even like if we're creating new programs and it's like, this is new, I've never done this before, and it might suck the first time you're trying to launch it, or but it's giving yourself that permission. And I think it's like, it's amazing because when I see clients like, okay, like that was so nerve-wracking doing that live, and I'm watching their live, I'm like, it was awesome, you know? So
Yeah, that's a big piece. Like we're always our worst inner critic, right? around, around that kind of thing. And yeah, I love this piece around the voice so much. In in this sense of getting into your fullest expression, how have you found with the deconditioning, with the human design, with the finding their voice, what does it allow women to do when they step into that?
I think one is the like, when we're, it depends on like what the work is. I can speak for myself that mine is like a lot around the emotions. So it's giving myself that permission to really feel. Because it's like, I think for so many of us, it's like this natural instinct to be like, no, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Right. Versus let's just anchor into like, that felt really shitty.
Right.
And the other piece is, I forgot your question.
So when a woman steps into embodying and fully expressing herself, like how does that change her world? How does that shift things for her?
Yeah, for me, like it's a feeling of liberation. And I know that, you know, when I see my clients step outside and just like, hey, like I'm here, it's that exhilaration and that feeling of aliveness that for me, it's like, I love that because I know that I'm making that shift. And the more we are willing to lean into that, it creates expansion in ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that whether it's for money or business or like whatever maybe specific thing, that would women come to you for a specific reason, that it ends up actually changing the rest of their life too? It's not just that one area.
Oh yeah, it's like it creates this ripple effect for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you feel, was you leaving corporate part of you feeling like stepping into your fullest expression and doing this type of work? What were some of like the bigger shifts when you really embodied that and felt that for yourself?
Yeah, you know, it was interesting because the last time I left corporate, I feel like what was really different in that was I was already um, starting to fully express myself. Like I worked in a engineering position and I was the only woman. And it was just very like, I was like a different person, right, in my corporate world. And then I had like, you know, there's me in the daytime and then me in the nighttime. And
Mhm.
so I just remember like one morning when I was in corporate and I was feeling like at the end, like I just showed up at work one day with face paint. I just had to like express who I was. And so by the time like stepped out of that position and just left the job, I felt so free and so liberated and also so proud of myself that I was willing to show up in my professional life as a fully expressed me. And so that energy continued to propel me forward afterwards.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And that's like it's such a huge piece around how much energy it takes to mask and to hold back and to show up as not you. It actually takes so much more energy. And it can, like, people can have this show up as like feeling heavy or actually carrying around extra weight or chronic fatigue, like all of these different things. That's so important. And in stepping into feeling more fully expressed, like how do you feel like it shifted for you and like how you chose to go about like work after that or relationships after that?
Yeah, honestly, it's it's a continuing unfolding. It's still a continuing journey of like, oh my gosh, like I realize there's parts of myself that I can show up even more still. And so for me, like my journey it's been in layers. In relationships, it's interesting because I know that when I start to feel like, oh, I can't fully be myself here, I can't fully express myself, this is really weird. Like there's that contrast. And then knowing, okay, I don't like, maybe this isn't the right fit, right? And even in my in business, it's what shifted for me is actually coming back deeper within myself. And even like when I write posts, it's coming from a place of not performance, but like this is the truth that's coming through right now. And I actually don't like the likes, the comments, like it doesn't matter. Like for me, it's like that just needed to be shared, and there it is.
Yeah, that piece around going deeper within and then not performing. I think that like for any woman, but especially those of us that have to show up online, it's it's quite the playground of personal development in doing anything online, and especially entrepreneurship, especially as a coach or like a personal development person. And do you have, so I know this is actually something I've been talking with my coach recently, where I was like asking her about, I was like, with branding stuff and looking into that, I was like, I see people really flocking to, posts of people drinking champagne and like this is my sales and high sales. And so people flock to that because they want that, right? They're like, that's the thing I want. And I was like, I love that stuff too. And I also want to be posting about like having dirt under my nails and being farming in some, farm that I'm volunteering at in Northern India or whatever. And I was like, I want it to be both. And like, I'm no longer like, I've started to notice where I internally get hooked. Like if I see someone else is posting that kind of thing, where noticing that and going more deeply within around, is that actually like, what part of that is me getting hooked into something that I think that I want, when really at the core of that, what is it that I'm actually looking to get out of like that person's experience? Because I think a lot of the time when we're online, I think there is a lot of people are performing, and I don't think it's necessarily them being bad people. It's just, I think a lot of people think they have to do it in order to be relevant or to be seen or flashy so that people, if they catch people's eye and that kind of stuff. And so I've just noticed where I'm getting more discerning around whose content I'm consuming, and really looking at the depth of what people are saying versus like the face value kind of a thing. What has been your experience with that as you go more deeply within, and as you yourself have like chosen to walk away from places where you kind of had to perform and show up in the social self kind of thing? What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, like I totally get what you're saying with like that branding, and personally like it's interesting, like I celebrate all of like, the celebrations, and it's amazing, especially when it's like women celebrating their achievements.
Totally.
And my own experience with all of that is with the performing, it's I like real, and I love like what draws me to people that I follow is that I want to hear your story. Like I want to hear the lessons that you've learned that got you there. And that to me is more appealing for me. And like, yeah, if I'm going to hire someone, I want to know their story, and also like even be a few steps ahead where you've gone down that path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I might not do it the exact same way, but I'm sure your emotional journey it will be similar to what I would experience. And how would you navigate that? I'd be interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've been unfollowing plenty of people on Instagram just because I'm like, yeah, I'm not that interested in necessarily the glitz and the glamour.
Mm-hmm.
But what's drawing me is like, I want to be able to feel your heart. And if you can show me your heart, and what values you have, then yeah, I'll keep you on.
Yeah, I 100% agree with, yeah, everything you just said. And I think too, that's really where the online space and the narrative and the realness of people is moving towards, I think it is going to be more about how real are you, and like connecting with other people in that is so huge. And it's comforting to know that that's like that's more important to people, and getting to be that where it's like we're not just following everybody and getting bombarded, because there's so much that comes at you every single day, and noticing where that energy, it's just like it's draining, and it can make you feel, if you're like start comparing and you're not really conscious that you're comparing to others, especially for entrepreneurs, it can really feel like you can start to feel like you pull back or contract or shrink and not want to go on lives because that person's already saying it too. And that's where the work that you do is so important, to help women like step into that full expression of like, no, like this is who I am. And it takes a lot of courage. It really does. Like you said, it takes a lot of courage to show up as the real you, because not everybody is going to like it. And to shine anyway, and to get to choose that is so important.
Yeah. And one of the things, like, it's easy when we're on the socials to be scrolling. And I think when we're mindlessly scrolling, that's like, there's conditioning that starts to happen, because then we're subconsciously taking in all the feeds and like, oh my God, and the judgments and all of that. It starts kicking
Yes.
in.
Yeah.
And so I find that if I'm just unconsciously scrolling, I'm like, ooh, okay, stop. Like I want to be actively participating in the social. So either I celebrate, I comment, or I'm posting something myself, or I'm like watching someone that I admire, that I follow. I'm watching one of their content. Otherwise, if I'm just like I'm bored, I'm avoiding something, and that's a different relationship to the socials that I don't really love.
Yeah. Yeah. Where it's almost like that avoidance or the addiction to it.
Yeah.
But that's a really powerful observation for people as well. So if anyone is wanting to work with you more, or look into and connect with your work more, where can they find you? What do you got going on? Tell me some more about what you got going on right now.
Yeah. So I'm available to, I don't know, stalk on
That's
Instagram.
basically what it is. Let's be real. It is online. It's a like polite stalking. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's real.
So Instagram, I'm michellewong.xo. And then I'm also on Facebook, Michelle Wong Catalyst. And if you're listening to this and you want to friend me on Facebook, just message me saying, hey, I heard you on Nicole's podcast. And that will be easier because there's so many friend requests. And so ways we can work together. So I have a few ways. One is, if people want to learn more about human design, I have a membership called HD Embodied. And that's really a space to learn human design, but also in a way that gives you space to ask questions and start practicing some of the learnings into your own life. I also offer one-on-one sessions. Currently, I have like a one-off session where it's around your chart in human design, but I'm changing it a little bit to make it more practical, like not just me giving you all the information, because I find that actually that's not helpful. It can be really overwhelming. So integrating more of like what's happening in your life with your chart, and then making it more practical. Or we have like one-offs, like monthly sessions together. And right now what's coming in hot is I have the receiving experiment in January. We start on the 1st, and it's literally 22 days of experimenting with our capacity to receive.
Ooh, I love that. That sounds so fun.
I ran it once this year in May, and it was like on this whim. And I was like, I need to expand my own receiving like muscles, because I just started realizing how, like it's actually not that strong. And so it was super fun to hold it and have other women share like what their expansion was. So I decided to do it again for next year. And then on the 29th of December, so in a few weeks, I'm doing the year's finale. So it's really like a way to celebrate 2021 and start, I don't know if I want to say planting seeds for 2022, but I'm having an astrologer come to share the highlights for next year, and just start grounding into next year's energy a little bit more.
Awesome. And we'll provide links and all the